spread of the coronavirus?
Spread of a deadly new virus.
How deadly is it? How fast can it spread? And how prepared are we?
Experts fear it could become
a pandemic. It can lead to organ failure, pneumonia and death. There's no treatment, so prevention is a top priority.
The coronavirus was leaked from China's bioweapons program. With all this hysteria, we have to ask ourselves, how did this happen? It has recently been revealed that the coronavirus could potentially be an extension of China's bioweapons program. When we think about war and weapons, many of us lean towards guns, physical violence, nuclear power, and bombs. However, we tend to forget one of the scariest methods of all, bioweapons. The threat of biological warfare is entirely real. Biological weapons are invisible, silent, unpredictable, and potentially fatal. History is no stranger to biological warfare either. The Japanese have previously tested at least 25 different disease-causing agents on inmates and innocent civilians. During the war, their military infected more than 1,000 water wells in small villages within China to document cholera and typhus outbreaks. They even went to the extent of dropping plague-infested fleas all over various Chinese cities. This caused multiple epidemics that persisted for years and would proceed to kill more than 30,000 people in 1947. In our current situation, researchers and curious citizens are growing suspicious of the sudden and violent onset of the coronavirus. But why do we think that the outbreak is a result of China's bioweapons program? Experts are confident that the coronavirus originated from Wuhan, as it has the most confirmed cases. They also took into consideration the activities, materials, and hazards that could have resulted in the outbreak. Wuhan is home to a few significant Chinese biotic research labs. Specifically, the city is known for the Wuhan Institute of Virology, China's most developed biological research lab. The Washington Times proposes that this site might be connected to an undercover Chinese biological warfare project. Reports state that the coronavirus is a biological weapon that was either intentionally or accidentally released from the research labs in the Hubei province. The terrifying thing about this virus is that it continues to mutate and change into more violent and deadly forms. Not only will this virus impact public health, but will be detrimental to tourism and the global stock market. We can see that investors are growing increasingly worried after travel-related companies took a huge hit just last week. If this outbreak transforms into something much larger, it will significantly impact global commerce.
Coronavirus is a biological weapon, developed in the 1980s by the Chinese scientists. They called it Wuhan 400, because it was developed just outside the city of Wuhan, the capital of the Hubei province. These are the lines from a book by Dean Koontz, named The Eyes of Darkness, published in 1981. Coronavirus, COVID-19, emerged as the most contagious outbreak in decades.
Breaking news. This Wuhan supervirus has escaped a lab. Everyone knows that this Wuhan supervirus has escaped a lab. And what is the government waiting for to address the issue exactly? How long is it going to take before there's a bulletin that comes through that says, hey, this supervirus that's coming to your town, it's a military weapon made to destroy America? When are they going to come out with the truth and just explain it to people so that they can prepare for what's coming, ladies and gentlemen? I mean, when a hurricane is on the horizon, you know, they send out planes, there's live coverage 24/7 everywhere. But where are the reports now? You know, if you listen to the government spokespeople out there, you know, 3 weeks, 4 weeks into this crisis, they're still talking about the wet market like it just came out of some kind of animal. But it didn't come out of a bat or a snake or an anteater. It came out of a weapons lab 3 blocks away from the seafood market. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on here. And yet these people on television are just letting in all the airplanes, the cruise ships, you name it. And they're treating it like it's no worse than the cold. Whether it be the news reports or the spokespeople for the government, they're just like, yeah, no worries. They're not saying anything. They're like, come on in. It's like all these, immigrants that they release, catch and release. It's the same policy, even though this mega death virus is within our shores. Thousands of suspected cases, according to experts, right now. And in fact, we're still real early into this epidemic. It's still in the pregnancy phase where it's impregnating, all the cities, all the towns. And before long, it'll look like China in the USA. They're going to be shutting everything down. They're going to be locking down every building, every mall, every school. And it starts little by little. First, they say no traffic in or out of the city. Then they say you can only go out once every 2 days to do your shopping. Then it'll be once every 3 days, once every 7 days. And now in Wuhan, they're no longer allowed to go outside. If they're found outside, they'll be picked up immediately and rendered to a quarantine zone.
We also face a new threat that the next epidemic has a good chance of originating on a computer screen of a terrorist intent on using genetic engineering to create a synthetic version of the smallpox virus or a contagious and highly deadly strain of flu. So the point is that we ignore the strong link between health security and international security at our peril. Whether it occurs by the quirk of nature or at the hand of a terrorist, epidemiologists show through their models that a respiratory spread pathogen would kill more than 30 million people in less than a year. And there is a reasonable probability of that taking place in the years ahead.
The World Health Organization declared the outbreak an international public health emergency.
Separate cases highlighting the ongoing threat posed by Chinese economic espionage and research theft in the United States.
Federal investigators at the Lexington home of 60-year-old Dr. Charles Lieber today, moments after his arrest at his Harvard office.
The complaint alleges that Dr. Lieber signed a contract with the Chinese university in Wuhan and was paid up to $50,000 per month, plus up to $158,000 in living expenses.
The chair of Harvard's chemistry department, he also allegedly received more than $1.5 million to set up a research lab in China, all while working at Harvard and receiving multiple research grants from the U.S. Department of Defense and National Institutes of Health. Also charged today, 2 Chinese nationals, 29-year-old Yang Qingyi, who worked as a scientific researcher at Boston University,
who failed to mention on her visa application that she is also a lieutenant with the People's Liberation Army.
30-year-old Zhaozong Zhang worked on cancer research at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center.
For trying to smuggle vials of biological material out of the United States to China and lying about it.
Charles Lieber was the chair of Harvard's Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology. In 2017, he was one of the college's most esteemed professors and was granted the rare title of University Professor. Only 25 other faculty members at Harvard had this title. But what the university didn't know was that he was secretly a part of China's 1,000 Talents Plan program. This initiative started in 2008 and was made by the Chinese government to recruit foreign talent to Chinese universities. And in Lieber's case, his offer was quite enticing. According to an affidavit released by the FBI on January 28th, Lieber partnered with Wuhan University of Technology to establish a research lab that focused on his specialty, nanoscience. And in return, he was paid $50,000 a month and roughly another $150,000 a year for living and personal expenses. He signed a deal that lasted roughly from 2012 to 2016. But Harvard officials eventually discovered that he established the WUT Harvard Joint Nano Key Laboratory without Harvard's knowledge or consent. And when he was confronted by the university in 2015 about using their name and logo in a partnership, he claimed that he conducted mutually beneficial research and didn't know that Wuhan was using Harvard's logo. His deception even got Harvard to accidentally lie during government interrogations, as the university didn't even know the full extent of his involvement with China. They thought he had stopped working with Wuhan in 2012 and that he was never a part of the 1,000 Talents program. Lieber has been under investigation since 2018, and to be clear, he wasn't actually charged with espionage, but lying to the U.S. about receiving money from the Chinese government. In the words of the Department of Justice, he was, quote, charged by criminal complaint with 1 count of making a materially false, fictitious, and fraudulent statement. But what made the DOJ particularly concerned about Lieber's alleged involvement with the 1,000 Talent program was that his lab at Harvard received more than $15 million from the National Institute of Health and the Department of Defense, meaning sensitive and confidential government information was disclosed to Lieber during his time at Wuhan. This is just one of 3 cases announced by the DOJ this week. In another, Ye Yanqing was a researcher at Boston University. While filing her visa, she lied to the U.S. government by not disclosing that she was actually a lieutenant in the People's Liberation Army and falsely identified herself as a student. While a researcher at BU from 2017 to 2019, she was directed by the PLA to conduct research on U.S. intelligence. The DOJ wrote that Ye had accessed U.S. military websites, researched U.S. military projects, and compiled information for the PLA on 2 U.S. scientists with expertise in robotics and computer science. She was detained by officials at Boston's Logan International Airport in April last year, where she lied by allegedly claiming that she maintained little contact with the PLA. But later on, she admitted that she was an active member of the PLA and was able to return to China. Despite being in China, she faces charges of visa fraud, conspiracy, making false statements, and acting as an agent of a foreign government. The third case involved a man who was detained at the same airport in December last year, when Zheng Xiaocong was detained for attempting to smuggle biological research materials out of the U.S. From 2018 to 2019, Zheng worked at Boston's Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center as a cancer cell researcher. According to documents, Zheng stole 21 vials of biological research from the medical center to bring to China. Allegedly, he lied about what was in his luggage, but when officials found the vials, he claimed he was going to use them to conduct research under his own name in China. All of the affiliates mentioned are potentially facing years in prison, plus over $100,000 in fines. But these cases aren't actually just a couple of fluke incidents. Like I mentioned earlier, they're considered part of China's large-scale attempt to take American scientific and intellectual property via espionage. And the federal government has shared their thoughts on this in depth. A report released last year by the Committee of Homeland Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs detailed their concerns over China. They wrote that the PRC has over 200 recruitment programs and described the 1,000 Talents plan as China's way of incentivizing American researchers to give information to the government through research grants and large salaries. Based on Lieber's case, that's not too far-fetched. And just to put some numbers to it, the Justice Department claims that since 2018, nearly 36 cases involving scientific and technological espionage were from China. Also, China is involved in over 80% of all U.S. economic espionage cases and is tied to 60% of all trade secret theft cases since 2012. Now,
the novel coronavirus has been called by many names informally, but now the WHO has officially designated it COVID-19. And the virus, it says, is public enemy number 1. Isunje has more.
The WHO has given the coronavirus an official name.
We now have a name for the disease, and it is COVID-19.
According to the head of the WHO, the organization had to find a name that did not refer to a geographical location, an animal, an individual, or group of people. Not to mention a name that's pronounceable and related to the disease. He added that having a name matters, as it prevents the use of other names that can be inaccurate or stigmatizing. The WHO chief stressed the dangers posed by COVID-19, calling it public enemy number 1.
A virus can have more powerful consequences than any terrorist action. And that's true. And if the world doesn't want to wake up and consider this enemy virus as public enemy number 1, I don't think we will learn from our lessons.
Meanwhile, according to the Director General, the first vaccine against the coronavirus could be ready in 18 months.
The first vaccine could be ready in 18 months. So we have to do everything today using the available weapon to fight this virus, while preparing for the long term using the preparation for the vaccines.
With a cure still a ways ahead, the Director General called for countries to be as aggressive as possible in fighting the outbreak.
Now, the Chinese coronavirus still raging across parts of Asia. It's killed almost 2,000 people as of tonight. Those are, again, the official numbers. It continues to infect thousands every day. Most experts believe the virus originally evolved in China's bat population and then spread from there to humans from Wuhan's so-called wet market. But some people, and this includes a few actual experts on the subject, are considering another possibility, that the coronavirus was made in a lab in Wuhan. You've probably seen that on the internet. Is it true? How plausible is this theory? Worth getting to the bottom of. Bill Gertz is a national security correspondent for the Washington Times. He joins us tonight. Bill, thanks so much for coming on.
Sure.
Now,
good to be on.
The last thing we'd ever want to do, of course, is endorse untrue information, particularly of this nature. But there's been enough written on this that it seems like it's worth assessing with someone who knows more. What do you make of this claim?
Well, first off, we don't know the origin of the virus. That's a fact. And anybody that says they know what it was the origin or was not the origin is either ill-informed or dishonest. And in the case of the Chinese government, you can imagine which of those options. But clearly,
yes,
there are signs, there are indications that it came from a bat and then to some intermediary animal, civet cat or pangolin, and then to humans. And the Chinese government has blocked the Centers for Disease Control from sending experts there. And the U.S. has some of the best virus experts in the world. We've suggested, the government has suggested 13 experts to go, and China has said no. So what are they hiding? Those are the questions. So there's a debate now. Is it human cause or laboratory cause, or is it a natural phenomenon? And I think it's important that we write about this, because this is what the role of a free press is, to report on these kinds of things, and let's get the debate going and let's get to the bottom of it.
Is there any evidence as of tonight that this virus originated in a lab?
Well, I don't know. We don't know that they were. We know that, here's another fact. The Wuhan Institute of Virology has the only P4 lab, that is for pathogen 4. It's the most secure lab you can have. There's only one in China that's declared, and it's in Wuhan, and it's like 20 miles from this market. That's a fact. The second fact, in January, the end of January, the British medical journal The Lancet published a Chinese government-funded study by 29 Chinese scientists, which said that the very first person to get this disease, to come down with this disease on December 1st, had no relationship to the seafood market or the wet market. So those are facts that, again, raise a whole bunch of questions about what is the origin of this. On top of that, the White House just last week ordered the National Academy of Sciences to conduct a study. They say, hey, look, we got to find out the origin of this. So they want to know what the origin is, too.
So, I mean, I think the headline of this conversation, which I appreciate your sober analysis, is that we don't actually know.
China built a hospital within days to ease the shortage of hospital beds in the coronavirus outbreak. But for some, this hospital is not reassuring.
State media call it super-fast hospitals. To cope with the overwhelming number of infected patients of the coronavirus, the Chinese authorities built this hospital called Fire God Mountain within 10 days. However, what's inside the hospital sparked some suspicion and fear. Chinese citizens questioned why it looks more like a prison than a hospital, with the windows sealed off with bars. The hospital is in the charge of the Chinese army. NTD's China expert says that this could further reduce outside access to the true situation of the epidemic.
The Huashen Hospital is taken over by the Chinese military, meaning all of the medical staff will be from the military. In that case, all the data and information in the hospital could become a military secret. The outside won't know it. The internal staff won't disclose it, because whoever did so could be charged with disclosing military information and could be sent to military court. It's like a black hole. People on the outside won't know how many patients went in there, won't know how many people have disappeared.
He said, given China's human rights record, the risk to patients' basic rights are also of concern.
At this stage, when the epidemic is out of control in China, when the communist authorities are under huge pressure, it's possible for the regime to test some kind of new therapies on patients.
He said China is also under pressure to try to prevent the international community from taking further measures to control the disease.
Of all the things that are out there, what could cause an excess in a single year of 10 million deaths? Now, clearly a big war could, and a pandemic, natural or created by bioterror. The natural pandemic, the last gigantic one, was 100 years ago. We are healthier today, but the speed of travel, and therefore the speed of global spread, that works against us. But in some ways, the bioterror thing scares me the most. All it takes is one small terrorism group. Those groups have used things like anthrax that are non-human to human transmissible, and as yet, thank goodness, they've never been able to build or get their hands on a nuclear weapon.
Are you nervous about your own life and
No.
what could happen?
This thing will get a lot of countries before it gets to the U.S., but even the U.S. has to think about its global health security. It's a government thing to decide, okay, this is a problem, how do you move resources around, how do you allocate the scarce supplies? When an epidemic hits, governments having been prepared in advance and going through simulations, that will help them make the decisions that are only in their hands.
Chen Qiushe wanted the world to know what was going on in Wuhan. For 2 weeks, the prominent lawyer and citizen journalist posted videos from the virus epicenter, revealing the true scale of a tragedy he said was unfolding before his eyes. Then he disappeared. His mother has been told he's in quarantine, but issued this appeal, knowing the authorities have silenced her son. 4 days later, Feng Bin went missing. His footage showing several bodies outside a Wuhan hospital and a man dying inside brought him to the attention of the police. The local shop worker hasn't been seen since February the 10th. They are just two of dozens detained and millions suppressed online for daring to criticize the government's response to the virus.
Not just dissidents or prominent activists, but now even just ordinary citizens. That we also heard stories about them being detained or being punished, either short, very brief detention or being warned by the police after they posted something on social media.
President Xi has been largely absent from the public eye, but has declared the country united in a people's war. He is said to have personally ordered the strict health checks and containment orders now in force across the country. The Chinese government has imposed the most extensive lockdown the world has ever seen. More than 500 million people are now living under some form of restricted movement or quarantine. It is an unprecedented response to a health emergency that is threatening to become an economic and political crisis too.
I work at King's as a senior research fellow, and I'm looking at how biological threats today are being shaped by developments in the life sciences. Biological threats are about the deliberate misuse of science for hostile purposes, and we're specifically talking about disease and infection. Some of the areas that we're particularly worried about are gene editing technologies, gain-of-function technologies, where you are deliberately creating potentially pandemic pathogens in the lab. Fortunately, there is a multinational treaty completely prohibiting biological weapons. The challenge for the treaty is essentially that there is no check to make sure countries are complying. This is of increasing concern because the number of countries that are developing biological defense programs which are permitted under the treaty is increasing. Alongside that, we've also got developments in science and technology that are decreasing the barriers to developing biological weapons.
עכשיו אנחנו במלחמה עם אויב שהוא בלתי נראה. אנחנו במלחמה. האויב שלנו זה נגיף. הנגיף הוא בלתי נראה.
So the country's at war, so to speak. Does that mean that Netanyahu can use wartime powers? Well, it's starting to look that way as the prime minister is greenlighting the use of military intelligence and anti-terror tracking technology to digitally monitor coronavirus patients without their permission. The Justice Ministry just needs to sign off now. But Netanyahu argues that with this technology, we can better track patients as well as with whom they've made contact. And the Sinn Bet Security Service stresses that there is no intention of using these capabilities to enforce or monitor quarantine instructions. However, Netanyahu does go on to admit that this will certainly infringe on personal privacy, and many activists across the country are understandably concerned.
אנחנו מפעילים את כל האמצעים שבידינו, כולל בקרוב מאוד, אחר בממשלה נקבל החלטה על אמצעים טכנולוגיים. אני קיבלתי פנייה ממשרד הבריאות, היא לא פשוטה. אמצעים דיגיטליים שבידינו, השתמשנו בהם למאבק בטרור. אני נמנעתי עד היום, בכל השנים שהייתי ראש ממשלה, להפעיל את האמצעים האלה בתוך הציבור האזרחי, אבל אין ברירה. אנחנו נאבקים עכשיו במלחמה שהיא מחייבת אותנו לנקוט באמצעים מיוחדים.
Meanwhile, Israeli police and health ministry officials are also upping their efforts to ensure compliance with the new regulations, like preventing gatherings and investigating or even arresting alleged quarantine breakers.
President Trump says that effort to contain the coronavirus is now a war, and health officials say the number of cases could soon skyrocket. Fox News correspondent Doug Luzader has more from Washington this morning with news that 2 members of Congress have now contracted the virus.
Well, this was probably just a matter of time, but 2 House members have now confirmed that they have coronavirus. As the president has said, this is a war.
I view it as in a sense, a wartime president. I mean, that's what we're fighting. I mean, it's a very tough situation.
President Trump asserting broad new authority under the Defense Production Act to respond to the virus. He also signed into law another relief bill that had just been passed by Congress.
The bill is passed.
But members of Congress are as vulnerable as anyone, with 2 House members now acknowledging that they have tested positive for the coronavirus. And public health officials are warning all of us to brace for more bad news as more test kits become available.
We will see the number of people diagnosed dramatically increase over the next 4 to 5 days.
The markets plunged again yesterday, and the recent losses have largely erased the gains under the Trump presidency. And after a trader and another worker tested positive for the virus, the New York Stock Exchange announced that it would temporarily halt floor trading next week and do all of its business electronically. And as the military prepares to deploy massive hospital ships to help ease the burden on hospitals in New York and the West Coast, Congress is starting work on another relief package, one that can provide checks to most Americans, but some are suggesting it won't be enough.
Recently, a 2018 Chinese TV segment has sparked discussion online. Chen Hu, a former official at China's 302 military hospital, talking about the possibility of using gene editing to create a super virus.
这些年来呢，我们经历过、看过很多大规模的疫情，像什么 SARS 啊、禽流感啊，甚至包括埃博拉，包括现在在南美流行的寨卡病毒。如果用基因编辑技术对这些病毒细菌加以改造的话，那么就可以生产出传播性更广，而且致命性更强的超级病毒和超级细菌。那么这样的超级病毒和超级细菌，它的杀伤能力，那真是可以和原子弹、氢弹，可以和化学武器相媲美。
The official said that if such technology went into the hands of bad people, it would be really dangerous. In recent years, China has become a world leader in genome editing. Dominance in biotechnology is explicitly called for in the regime's Made in China 2025 master plan. But how the Chinese regime uses such technology has raised some controversies. Last year, the New York Times reported that China has been using DNA to track its people and implement social control. Chinese biotech companies have also been found buying and investing in U.S. sequencing companies which collect DNA from Americans. A China expert says the regime's human rights record raises concern about whether they can dominate such technology.
For a regime that has been lying to the international community, or for a person who has a terrible credit history, If such a person is working hard on something that can be used as bioweapons, would people think the person is trying to help humanity, or would people feel threatened?
He said the Chinese military has kept a keen interest in the research of biological warfare. Two former Chinese generals have said in their 1998 book, Unrestricted Warfare, that the media, cyberspace, and ecology all become future battlefield.
To do this work. And so when we look at this kind of risk, the epidemic risk,
communist dictatorship. They have people that are under authoritarian control. Think about it. The doctor that actually was the whistleblower on this ended up dead. They probably had this in the late fall, especially early winter. Instead of calling people in and learning how to help and develop a way for us to know how to treat this, they downplayed it.
Suggesting the virus may have come from China's biological warfare program.
China was lying from the beginning, and they're still lying today.
And this is one of the issues, because you had initially the doctor who was a whistleblower, in effect, who said, look, start wearing protective gear because we've got this coronavirus happening. He was arrested. He was shamed in the press. And unfortunately, now he's dead. At the same time, we need to really understand why these diseases keep coming out of China. We've been told that this originated in an open seafood market.
We also know that just a few miles away from that food market is China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that researches human infectious diseases. We need to at least ask the question to see what the evidence says, and China right now is not giving any evidence on that question at all.
So this super lab that you referred to, this super lab is the only one of its kind in this area, in Wuhan, in the province, that area, and what do they do at this super lab?
China is obviously very secretive about what happens at the Wuhan laboratory.
现在全部都就这个洞洞，就这个一溜过了。必须得有大型消毒。
现在开始，1、2、3、4、5、6、7，一共有8个。